Memphis, Baptist Memorial Hospital. Summer, 1977. The hallway smells of disinfectant and something metallic underneath, the kind of scent that never quite leaves your clothes. The lights are too bright for a place where people are supposed to rest. Every sound is controlled. Shoes softened by rubber soles, carts moved slowly, voices kept low as if sound itself could do damage. Security stands at both ends of the floor. Not police. Not exactly private guards either. Men hired to make sure nothing unexpected happens. And, more importantly, that nothing human slips through the system. The elevators no longer stop here. Phones ring somewhere behind closed doors and go unanswered. Even the nurses move, as if following invisible lines drawn on the floor. Elvis Presley is here. Not on a stage. Not at Graceland. Not surrounded by screaming fans or flashing cameras. He is behind one of these doors, weakened, monitored, reduced to numbers on screens and clipped medical phrases. The press doesn't know yet, not officially. But the air has that particular tension that comes before headlines are written. The industry senses an ending even before it's allowed to say the word. Orders have already gone out. No visitors, no old friends, no memories that could trigger emotion. Doctors talk about stress. Managers talk about liability. Insurance clauses are mentioned more often than Elvis's name. Everyone agrees on one thing. Sentiment is dangerous. Any visit is a risk. Any familiar face could undo weeks of controlled calm. And then, quietly, almost by accident, a name passes between two people near the nurse's station. It isn't announced. It isn't questioned out loud. Dean Martin. The name lands softly. And yet it changes the temperature in the corridor. A nurse looks up from her chart when she hears it, searching her memory. Then deciding she doesn't recognize the man standing a few steps away. He isn't dressed for attention. No entourage, no urgency. Just a hat held loosely in one hand, shoulders relaxed, eyes alert but unreadable. Visiting hours are restricted, she says, professionally, without apology. He nods, doesn't argue, doesn't explain who he is. That refusal to introduce himself cuts deeper than a denial ever could. For a brief second, he is simply another man being told where he does not belong. Someone from security steps closer. Low voice, careful words. He can't see anyone from his past right now. Not friends, not reminders, not mirrors. The implication hangs there. The past is too heavy. The past could break him. There are no cameras anywhere on this floor, and yet the pressure feels tighter than any live broadcast Dean Martin has ever stood under. No applause to lean on. No audience to distract from the weight of the moment. Just the quiet threat that one wrong decision could be blamed forever. If Elvis gets worse, fingers will point. If something leaks, names will be dragged into the light. Dean listens. He doesn't respond immediately. He looks down the corridor, the long, sealed stretch of silence leading to a closed door that might as well be a border. For the first time, the risk is clear. Not scandal, not reputation. A conversation. A single room. Two men with too much history and no witnesses. And everyone here is afraid of what might happen if that door opens. Let us know where you're watching from. And we hope you enjoy the story. The silence of the hospital corridor doesn't belong to this moment alone. It stretches backward, pulling memory with it, dragging the weight of decades into a space that pretends to exist outside of time. Long before this floor was sealed, before men in plain suits guarded elevators, America learned to worship speed. The faster you rose, the harder you were held. Elvis Presley was not shaped by the era. He was seized by it. From the first televised sway of his hips the system understood what it had caught. Something explosive, something profitable, something that could never be allowed to slow down. By the time the 1960s hardened into rules instead of dreams, Elvis no longer belonged to himself. Every appearance was measured, every breath insured, every weakness categorized as a risk. The world called it protection. Inside the machinery, it was called control. Dean Martin moved differently through the same decades. Where Elvis burned, Dean distanced. Where one was consumed by expectation, the other learned to stand slightly apart from it. He mastered a tone that suggested ease, even when nothing about the industry was easy. Not rebellion, restraint, not escape, insulation. Hollywood respected that, and quietly resented it. There was an unspoken law in those years, never written down because it never needed to be. You do not expose vulnerability. Not yours. Certainly not someone else's. Weakness was allowed only if it could be edited, framed, sold. Anything unfiltered was dangerous. That law still rules this hospital floor. Colonel Tom Parker's presence isn't visible here, but it doesn't need to be. His authority lives in policies, in contracts that outlast health, in decisions made without ever entering the room. Even now, while Elvis lies monitored by machines, the system surrounding him remains alert, not to his condition, but to its consequences. Studios think in terms of aftermath. Managers think in terms of narrative control. No one is trained to think about the man in the bed. People around Elvis aren't afraid of death. They're afraid of what death might reveal, of moments that don't fit the mythology, of truths that can't be polished. Dean understands this without being told. He remembers something Elvis once said years ago, off stage, without humor, without performance. That Dean was the only man in the room he didn't feel measured against. The only one he didn't feel the need to impress. At the time, it sounded like a compliment. Now, it sounds like a confession. While the system claims to be protecting Elvis, it is also isolating him, stripping away anything that reminds him he existed before the image. The irony is precise and cruel. The more fragile he becomes, the less human contact he's allowed. Dean isn't feared as a celebrity. He's feared as a witness. He doesn't sell moments. He doesn't leak stories. He doesn't explain himself. And that is exactly why this era doesn't know how to handle him. Standing there, waiting without protest, Dean recognizes the truth beneath the restrictions. They are not guarding Elvis from stress. They are guarding the illusion from honesty. And somewhere behind that closed door is a man who has spent his life being watched and may finally need someone who isn't looking for anything at all. The corridor hasn't changed, but the mood inside it tightens. What was once polite distance becomes calculation. People begin to move with intention, not routine. Someone has decided that waiting is no longer acceptable. The first approach is clean, almost elegant. A man from the management team, not important enough to be remembered, important enough to speak, steps into Dean's line of sight. His smile is practiced, weightless, the kind designed to end conversations without starting arguments. Mr. Presley isn't receiving visitors today. No explanation follows. None is expected. Dean removes his hat slowly, as if acknowledging a rule that deserves respect. He doesn't correct the man. He doesn't ask for an exception. He simply stays where he is. The absence of resistance throws the speaker off balance. Silence, when unplanned, becomes uncomfortable. Minutes pass. The second attempt abandons formality and leans toward conscience. This time the voice is lower, closer. A warning shaped like concern. You understand the situation, someone says. If anything upsets him, If his condition worsens, that responsibility doesn't disappear. The word hangs unspoken, but its outline is clear. Blame. Dean looks up, finally meeting the eyes of the man addressing him. His response is quiet, stripped of performance. "I didn't come to improve him," he says. "I came to be honest." It isn't defiance. It isn't persuasion. It's a statement that doesn't invite negotiation. The hallway absorbs it, and for a moment, no one knows where to place it. The third intervention arrives without introduction. A guard, pretending to adjust his stance, leans just enough to be heard. The tone shifts, less polite, more precise. "If the press finds out you're here, this becomes something else." A threat, disguised as inevitability. Dean's mouth curves, not into a smile, but into something close. "Recognition, perhaps," he answers, without raising his voice. "The press doesn't know what silence looks like." That lands harder than intended, because it exposes the flaw in every scenario they've prepared. Cameras can be managed. Statements can be issued. Narratives can be shaped. But a quiet moment between two men, unrecorded and unrepeatable, cannot be controlled once it exists. The people surrounding him feel it slipping. A nurse at the desk glances up again. This time, not from procedure, from memory. The voice, the cadence, something aligns. Her fingers pause above the chart. She doesn't speak, but her certainty wavers. Dean remains still. He doesn't pace. He doesn't press forward. He doesn't ask permission again. His calm unsettles them more than anger ever could. There is no script for someone who refuses to play the expected role. No leverage to apply when the outcome no longer matters to the person standing there. The door at the end of the corridor stays closed, but the space around it changes. Conversations shorten. Eye contact breaks faster. The system senses a loss of control, and systems do not like uncertainty. Finally, a subtle shift. Not an order, not approval. A pause where resistance used to be. A nod from the nurse. A step aside that isn't announced. Dean moves. He reaches the door without ceremony. His hand rests on the handle for a moment longer than necessary. Not hesitation. Acknowledgement. Whatever happens next will not be undone. Behind him, the hallway holds its breath. In front of him, a room waits. Not for a legend, not for a guest, but for something far more dangerous. Truth. Without witnesses. The door closes without a sound. The kind of silence that follows isn't empty. It's dense, layered, charged with things neither man has said in years. The room is dimmed more than necessary. Light filtered through blinds turns the walls into pale stripes. Machines hum softly, steady and indifferent. Elvis Presley lies angled slightly to one side, thinner than memory allows, his breathing measured, controlled. His eyes lift before Dean moves closer. Dean doesn't speak right away. He doesn't step toward the bed, doesn't reach out, doesn't announce himself. He lets presence do the work first. Elvis studies him, then exhales a half-smile that tries to be familiar, tries to reach for old reflexes. "You always had timing," he says quietly, as if humor might still protect him. Dean tilts his head, acknowledging the attempt, but doesn't build on it. He places the hat on a nearby chair instead, carefully, as though it belongs to the room now. Only then does he sit, not beside the bed, but a short distance away. Close enough to matter, far enough to leave space. The joke fades on its own. What remains is the sound of breathing, slightly uneven. A hand tightening on the sheet, then loosening again. Dean watches these details, without comment. He has learned over decades that people reveal more in what they do unconsciously than in anything they perform. He doesn't look at the machines. He doesn't look for signs of decline. He looks at the man who has been watched his entire life. Elvis shifts, uncomfortable under a tension that isn't admiration. "They didn't want you here," he says, not accusing, just stating fact. "I know," Dean replies. Another pause. Longer this time. Dean doesn't mention hospitals, or danger, or endings. He doesn't say how thin Elvis looks, or how tired. He doesn't reach backward into shared history, or forward into reassurance. He stays exactly where he is. That restraint does something subtle. Elvis stops performing. The familiar tension, the readiness to entertain, to deflect, to control, loosens its grip. His shoulders sink slightly into the mattress. His voice, when it comes again, is lower, unprotected. "They keep telling me to rest," he says, "but they don't let anything rest." Dean nods once, no judgment, no correction. "You've been expected to carry noise," he says, "even when you needed quiet." The words aren't delivered like wisdom. They're offered like an observation anyone paying attention could make. That's what makes them land. Elvis closes his eyes briefly. Not to escape, to feel the weight of not being required to respond immediately. When he opens them again, there's moisture there, but no release yet. Dean remains still. He understands that this moment isn't about comfort. It's about permission. The permission to stop being impressive, to stop being strong, to stop being anything other than present. He doesn't ask how Elvis feels. He doesn't ask what he's afraid of. He allows the silence to stretch until it becomes safe. And eventually, Elvis fills it. Not with words rehearsed for public ears, but with something rawer, slower, closer to the ground. The sound of a man realizing that, for the first time in a very long while, nothing is being taken from him. In that quiet room, without witnesses or consequence, Dean Martin does the rarest thing possible. He listens, without trying to fix what he hears. The words come out of Elvis slowly, as if he isn't sure they're allowed to exist in the room. Not dramatic, not framed, almost embarrassed. "I'm not scared of dying," he says. His eyes stay fixed on the ceiling, not on Dean. "I'm scared of what stays after." The machines continue their quiet work. Nothing reacts, no alarm, no interruption. The world outside the room remains unaware that something irreversible has just been admitted. Elvis swallows, his throat working harder than it should. "They already decided how I'm supposed to look in the end," he adds. "Weak, controlled, like I slipped and couldn't get back up." He turns his head then, just enough to see if Dean is still there, still listening. "I don't want that to be the last thing," he says. "Not that version." Dean doesn't rush to answer. He doesn't soften his face. He doesn't move closer. Comfort, in this moment, would feel like correction, and correction would feel like control. Instead, he lets the admission settle. "You don't get to manage the picture," Dean says at last. His voice is calm, unforced. "Not anymore." Elvis frowns slightly, confused. That isn't reassurance. It isn't encouragement. It isn't the kind of thing people usually say when someone is afraid. Dean continues, measured. "The strength everyone keeps chasing. That's their need, not yours." He pauses, just long enough to make sure the words aren't filling space, but making it. "Real strength," he adds, "is knowing when you don't owe anyone a performance." That lands differently. Elvis's breathing changes first, shallower, then deeper, as if something tight around his chest has loosened without permission. His mouth opens, closes again. No joke arrives to cover the feeling. No practiced phrase steps in to rescue him. Silence stretches, not empty, not tense, honest. When the tears come, they don't fall all at once. One gathers, then breaks free, tracing a line across his cheek without ceremony. Elvis doesn't wipe it away. He doesn't turn his face. He doesn't apologize. He exhales, a sound closer to release than relief. For years, tears would have meant headlines, questions, speculation. Here, they mean nothing beyond what they are. Dean doesn't stand, doesn't reach out, doesn't close the distance. He understands the discipline of space. How rare it is for someone like Elvis to be given room without expectation, without direction. Stepping closer would turn the moment into something shared. Leaving space allows it to remain Elvis's alone. Another breath, another tear. Elvis's shoulders shake once, then still. When he speaks again, his voice is stripped down to its simplest form. "I'm tired," he says. Dean nods. No correction, no response designed to lift him out of it. "I know," he answers. "Nothing more." In that room, the industry's script collapses quietly. No redemption arc, no final pose, just a man, allowed, finally, to stop holding himself together for anyone else. And in that permission, something shifts. Not the body, not the outcome, the weight. For the first time in years, Elvis Presley isn't being remembered. He's being allowed to exist. Nothing is announced when Dean Martin leaves the room. No doors swing open. No one rushes forward with questions. The corridor looks the same. Polished floors, neutral faces, controlled movement. Yet something in its rhythm has shifted. Word travels anyway. Not through headlines or calls to reporters, but through pauses, in conversation. Through glances exchanged a second too long. Through voices that lower instinctively when his name is mentioned. Martin was here. That's all anyone says. No embellishment, no explanation. The lack of detail makes the sentence heavier than any rumor. In an industry addicted to narration, silence becomes a signal. Management doesn't react the way they would to a breach. There is no outrage, no threats, no damage control meetings. Instead, there's restraint. The kind that comes when people realize something happened outside their authority. Contracts don't cover moments that were never meant to be documented. Legal language has no defense against discretion. Colonel Parker doesn't comment. He doesn't need to. His system recognizes a boundary it didn't set and chooses not to test it. The machinery keeps running, but it adjusts its pace, careful not to draw attention to itself. Among the older circle, musicians who survived the shifts, producers who remember when stages were smaller and reputations more fragile, the reaction is quieter, almost respectful. They don't ask what was said. They don't speculate about the condition. They simply stop speaking about Elvis as if he were already gone. Something in the tone changes. A few people cancel visits they'd planned just to be seen. Others delay phone calls that suddenly feel intrusive, not out of instruction, out of instinct. The understanding spreads without coordination. That room has already held something complete. Dean's name isn't used to elevate the moment. It's used to explain its restraint. He didn't bring anyone. He didn't talk. He didn't stay long. Each sentence adds weight by removing drama. This wasn't a move. It wasn't positioning. It wasn't legacy building. It was presence. And presence, unaccompanied by noise, unsettles people who depend on control. Dean himself doesn't participate in the aftermath. He doesn't correct assumptions. He doesn't confirm timelines. He doesn't grant meaning to the curiosity circling him. When asked, carefully, indirectly, he redirects with a shrug, a subject change, a neutral answer that offers no foothold. Not secrecy as strategy, but privacy as principle. That restraint earns something rare, No one pushes. In a business built on extraction, the refusal to harvest a moment becomes an act of authority. The people who recognize that are the ones who've lasted long enough to know the cost of crossing it. The visit never becomes a story. It becomes a boundary. And within that boundary, Elvis is allowed something the industry never planned for. A few days without being interpreted, without being managed as an outcome, without being reduced to an arc. No one can quite explain why things feel different. They just do. Like a wave that passed without crashing, leaving the water unsettled, but undeniably changed. A few days pass, not marked by announcements or medical updates that reach the public. Time moves the way it does when no one is counting it out loud. Inside the hospital room, the machines still hum. Elvis Presley does not recover in any way that would satisfy a chart or justify optimism. His body remains fragile, resistant to improvement. That much does not change. Something else does. He asks for the music to be turned off. Not because it hurts, not because it tires him, simply because he no longer needs it filling the space. The silence that follows is not threatening. It doesn't demand anything. He lies there without rehearsing a future moment, without preparing himself to be seen. There is less tension in his hands, less vigilance in his eyes. The constant readiness, the posture of a man who has lived as a symbol, loosens its grip. For the first time in a long while, he isn't waiting for the next cue. Nothing dramatic comes of it. No breakthrough. No redemption scene. Just stillness. Dean Martin returns to his own life as if nothing remarkable has occurred. He doesn't frame the visit as meaningful. He doesn't protect it with language. He carries it the way he has carried many things over the years, privately, without explanation. When friends mention Memphis, he nods and moves on. When someone tries to draw a conclusion, he doesn't follow them there. The restraint isn't modesty. It's respect. Some moments lose their value the second they're shared. In that refusal, his stature grows quietly, not as a savior, not as a figure in someone else's ending, but as a man who understood the difference between intervention and intrusion. What he gave Elvis was not hope in the way people like to define it. He offered something far rarer, the absence of expectation, the chance to exist without being framed by outcome. The industry continues to operate. Schedules are adjusted. Conversations resume. The world prepares itself unconsciously for news it hasn't yet received. But something has already settled. A calm, heavy, unmistakable truth. That not every final act needs an audience. That not every tear needs to be witnessed to matter. Some of the most important moments pass without sound, without record, without anyone claiming them afterward. The hallway at Baptist Memorial Hospital empties, as it always does. Doors close. Lights dim. Life continues elsewhere. And somewhere within that quiet, a man who spent his life being watched was given one last thing the world never learned how to offer him. Privacy. The door closes. No echo follows.